The white SUV hit my mailbox at 38 miles an hour. I heard it from the workshop, not the crunch of metal folding. The other sound, the dead, flat thud of metal that refuses to fold. I set the coffee down next to the shadow box on the workshop shelf, the one I'd stopped looking at years ago, and walked out the side door. The Pine Ridge HOA patrol vehicle was nose down in my gravel. Light bar still flashing. Airbag deployed. Steam in a thin gray rope off the hood. My mailbox was still standing. The driver's door cracked open with the sound of bent metal. A boot hit the gravel. Then a hand. Then a forehead, bleeding from a thin cut where the airbag had clipped her brow. Lieutenant Brenda Caldwell, Pine Ridge HOA Chief of Patrol, straightened up in her tactical polo and her mirrored sunglasses and her 2-inch nickel-plated badge, and she pointed at me with a finger that was still shaking from the impact. "You," she said, "are going to pay for this. That mailbox is a hazard. I'm writing you a $1,200 citation and calling the sheriff for reckless endangerment of an officer." She dabbed at her eyebrow with the back of her wrist. "You should have known better than to put up a structure like that, especially at your age." She had just driven her own vehicle into a federally compliant mail receptacle on a county road her HOA did not own, and she was billing me for her bumper. I went back inside, picked up my mug, and carried it down the driveway. Black coffee, gone lukewarm. I set it on the top rail of the fence post. I was 61 years old. I had been waiting for this exact moment for 14 months. I was not in a hurry. There was something the people listening to this need to understand about the shape of the thing. This was the 7th time. The 7th time a Pine Ridge HOA patrol vehicle had hit my mailbox in 14 months. The first 6, the post had bent. The first 6, the patrol vehicle had backed up, taken its dent, and driven off. And the next morning, I had received a certified letter from the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association offering, in escalating tones, to buy the road frontage easement that had been deeded to my family in 1979. 6 letters. 6 hits. The pattern was clean enough to be embarrassing. So 3 weeks earlier, I had ordered a Salisbury Industries USPS-approved heavy-duty mailbox. I had ordered an ASTM F2656 rated security bollard. I had poured concrete to a depth of 42 inches. I had set 4 4K cameras into the fence posts and the tree line, and I had installed all of it to United States Postal Service specification. The exact height, the exact offset, the exact reflective marking required by federal regulation, because I was not interested in a trap. I was interested in a mailbox that stood up. What she did not know, what no one in her HOA had bothered to learn before they put a patrol uniform on her, was that running over a U.S. Postal Service-approved mailbox is a federal felony. 3 years per count. She had just earned the first of 7. Lieutenant Caldwell was still talking. She had peeled a coolant-soaked clipboard out of her Explorer and was writing on it one-handed, while blood ran into her left eyebrow. $1,200, she repeated. Creation of a roadway hazard. You can expect a lien on your property within 90 days if it isn't paid in full by the end of the month. She tore the page off the clipboard and held it out to me on the flat of her palm the way someone hands a leash to a dog. I took the citation. I looked at the badge on her chest. I looked at the VIN on the dash of the Explorer. I looked at the embroidered name tag, Caldwell, B, above her left breast pocket. I took out my phone. Her hand flinched toward the pepper spray on her belt. I did not dial 911. I photographed the badge. I photographed the VIN. I photographed the name tag. I photographed the mailbox, the bollard, the bumper, the deployed airbag, the broken headlight, the skid pattern in the gravel, and the position of the patrol vehicle relative to the center line of County Road 14, in that order. I had done this kind of documentation, in roughly that order, 417 times in the course of a previous career. She watched me do it. She did not understand what she was watching. She had no idea the man writing down her badge number had spent 26 years writing down badge numbers for the federal government. She mistook the silence for fear. People in tactical polos with $30 badges almost always do. She squared her shoulders. She raised her voice so the Vargas Ranch across the road would hear her clearly, and she threw the line that would, eventually, end her career. "We own this road," she said. "We own this whole stretch of frontage. You are squatting on Pine Ridge Estates property, and we will have you removed by Monday morning." I slipped the phone back into my jacket pocket. I picked up my coffee from the fence post. It was cold. 6 months earlier, none of this would have made sense. By tonight, it would land on the desk of a federal investigator. I just hadn't told her yet that the federal investigator was me. To understand what was sitting in my gravel that morning with its airbag in its lap, you have to go back 6 months. 6 months earlier, the only sound on County Road 14 was the sound of my truck idling at the cattle gate at 5:40 in the morning, and the low complaint of a black Angus heifer who did not approve of the hour. I had 240 acres. My great-grandfather had bought the first 80 in 1923 with money he made shoeing horses in a railroad town that does not exist anymore. My grandfather had added the next 80 in 1951 with a VA loan and a handshake. My father had added the last 80 in 1979, and he had done one other thing the same year that nobody in Pine Ridge Estates had bothered to read before they started swinging. He had recorded the easement, County Road 14, where it ran along the front of our property. The stretch with my mailbox on it was a private easement in fee to the Holloway Ranch, recorded at the Pinewood County Courthouse on the 14th of March 1979, instrument number 79-0-4412. The county graded it. The county didn't own it. I did. I knew that the morning I walked the pasture in the dark. The HOA, as it turned out, did not. Pine Ridge Estates went up in 2018. On 80 acres of pasture land, the Halverson family sold to a developer the year after Old Man Halverson's stroke, 96 homes, cul-de-sacs with names like Sterling Oak Court and Bridle Path Lane, a clubhouse with a pool, a monument sign at the entrance in fake limestone, and one problem the developer had not bothered to solve before he poured the slabs. Pine Ridge had one way in and one way out. A single road that fed onto State Highway 290 at a light that backed up half a mile every afternoon. The fire marshal had signed off on the development with a written note that a secondary egress would be required within 5 years for continued occupancy certification. The developer had nodded and built the homes anyway and then sold the whole thing to the homeowners and walked away with his check. 5 years was up in 2023. The only piece of land that could give Pine Ridge a second exit onto the highway was the strip of road frontage in front of my ranch, my easement, my family's easement, recorded in 1979. Instrument number 79-04412, on file at the courthouse where anyone with $12 and an afternoon could go look it up. The first letter from the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association arrived in January of 2024. It was polite. It offered to buy the frontage easement for $12,000 and called it a neighborly arrangement that benefits both communities. I wrote back, also politely, and declined. I am not a community. I am a ranch. My grandfather did not haul that road in by hand, so that 96 homeowners could shave 6 minutes off their commute. The second letter arrived in March. It was less polite. It offered $18,000 and mentioned alternative legal remedies. In April, my mailbox got hit for the first time. I want you to understand the shape of what happened next, because it was not random and it was not stupid in the way most people imagine HOA stupidity. It was patient. It was patterned. It was, in its own small and ugly way, professional. After every letter I declined, my mailbox went down within 72 hours. Letter, hit. Letter, hit. Letter, hit. By August, I had 6 bent mailbox posts in a row stacked behind my workshop like firewood, and I had 6 certified letters in a file folder, each one dated within 3 days of a hit. I did not call the sheriff. I had already learned what the sheriff's office did with calls about the Pine Ridge HOA. I had heard about it from Hector Vargas, who ran cattle on the 180 acres directly south of me, and from Amina Mboya, who kept horses on the 160 acres directly north. They had been getting their own letters. They had been getting their own hits. And every time one of them called the sheriff, the response had come back the same way. Private property dispute. HOA matter, not law enforcement jurisdiction. It was the wrong answer. I knew it was the wrong answer, but I was not ready to say so yet. Instead, I started to read. The Pine Ridge HOA had a board of 5. Karen Caldwell, president, 3 years running, the kind of woman who pronounced the word community the way other people pronounce the word kingdom. Vice president, treasurer, secretary, and at-large member, all handpicked, all reliable, all afraid of her. The patrol unit, which the HOA called the Pine Ridge Community Safety Division, had been Karen's idea. 6 tactical polos. 2 white Ford Explorers, marked with light bars. A chief position they had created for her 31-year-old daughter, Brenda Caldwell, who had failed the State Police Academy twice on the physical, twice on the written, and had been working at a tanning salon when her mother appointed her. Brenda was the one who hit the mailboxes. Every time. Same driver. Same vehicle. Same time of day. I had her on camera. I had her on 6 different cameras. I had her plate, her face, her uniform, her route, and the timestamp on every single hit. I did not act on any of it. People who have not done this kind of work do not understand the temptation. You see the evidence. You watch it pile up, and every instinct in your body wants to walk it into a courthouse on a Tuesday morning and have it over with by Friday. I did not do that. I had been trained, for 26 years, not to do that. You let the pattern complete. You let the actor commit to the pattern. You let the paper trail get long enough to be undeniable, and then you bring it all to one place at one time and you do it once. In October, I drove into town and pulled the HOA's expansion proposal out of the public planning file at the county. There was a map attached. The map showed Pine Ridge Estates in pale green, the highway in gray, and a thin red corridor running across the front of 3 properties. Vargas, Holloway, and Boya, labeled, in 12-point aerial, proposed Pine Ridge secondary egress. They had drawn a road across our easements on a map and submitted it to the county like it was already theirs. I put the map in my workbench drawer, on top of the 6 bent mailbox posts, next to the file folder with the 6 certified letters. Underneath the old USPS Postal Inspection Service training manuals I had pulled down off the workshop shelf the week before, the ones I had not opened in 9 years. There is a leather wallet I keep in the bottom drawer of the workbench. Inside the wallet is a piece of metal I have not had reason to carry since the day I retired. I ran my thumb across the outside of the wallet the night I filed the expansion map. I did not open it. Not yet. The 7th letter arrived 3 days before the 7th hit. It did not offer money. It offered, in language that a real attorney had clearly never reviewed, immediate annexation under HOA emergency egress authority pursuant to community safety statutes. There was no such statute. There was no such authority. There was no such thing. I poured the concrete for the bollard the next morning. The certified letter came on a Tuesday in November. I signed for it at the gate. The carrier, a regular USPS letter carrier on a regular USPS route, the kind of detail that would matter later in ways the HOA never thought about, handed me the green card and a manila envelope with the Pine Ridge Estates seal embossed on it in dark green ink. I thanked her by name. She drove on. I opened it in the workshop. The letter was 4 pages. The first 3 were a recitation of HOA bylaws I had never signed, never voted on, and was not bound by. The 4th page was a bill. Total outstanding fines, $4,800. $800 for failure to maintain HOA aesthetic frontage standards. $800 for unapproved roadway adjacent structure. $800 for non-compliance with monthly inspection request. $800 for obstruction of community access. $800 for refusal to acknowledge HOA jurisdictional authority. And $800, listed last and underlined, for administrative processing of repeated violations. They were fining me $800 for the cost of fining me. At the bottom of the page, in a different font, in bold, failure to remit within 30 days will result in escalation to lien proceedings against the above-named property. I read it twice. I put it in the folder with the other 6 letters. I made a fresh cup of coffee. I sat down at the workbench, and I did the one thing I had been refusing to do for 14 months. I called Hector Vargas, and I called Amina Imboya, and I told them I was going to the next Pine Ridge HOA board meeting. Hector laughed once, short and dry, and said, "They will not let you in, Frank." I said, "I know." I said, "That's the point." The meeting was on the 2nd Thursday of the month, in the Pine Ridge Clubhouse, the one with the fake limestone columns and the pool with the rule sign that listed 14 prohibited activities. I parked at the curb. I walked in through the front door with the manila envelope under my arm and a small audio recorder in the breast pocket of my Carhartt jacket, the kind a journalist would carry, the kind that runs for 9 hours on a charge and produces a clean MP3 with a date stamp embedded in the metadata. I had not bought it for this. I had owned it for 19 years. It had testified, in transcript form, in 3 federal trials. The room held about 60 residents in folding chairs and a 5-person board at a long table on a low stage. Karen Caldwell sat at the center of the table in a cream blazer with a small enamel pin shaped like the Pine Ridge Monument sign. Behind her, against the back wall, Lieutenant Brenda Caldwell stood in full tactical polo, with her hands clasped at the small of her back, parade rest, as if she had ever in her life been in a military. I took a seat in the 3rd row, heads turned. Karen Caldwell looked up from her notes, found me, and held my gaze for exactly 1 second, before she looked back down and made a small note with her pen. The meeting opened with the pledge, then a treasurer's report, then a discussion of the upcoming holiday decoration contest, which lasted, by my watch, 22 minutes. I sat. I listened. I waited. When the chair asked for community comments, I stood. "Mr. Holloway," Karen Caldwell said, before I had opened my mouth, "you are not in our database." I said, "I know." I said, "I came to talk about the letters." "You don't get a voice in this community," she said, "because you are not part of this community. If you would like to be part of this community, you can submit an application to the membership committee, pay the initiation fee, and accept the bylaws. Until that time, please sit down." A man in the back row said quietly, "Just let him talk." Karen Caldwell did not look at him. She said, into the microphone, "Lieutenant Caldwell, please escort Mr. Holloway out." Brenda crossed the room in 8 steps. She put her hand on my elbow. I want to be clear about what that was. It was not a guiding hand. It was a grip. Thumb on the inside of my upper arm, 4 fingers wrapped to the bone, the way a bouncer moves a drunk who has overstayed his welcome. I am 61 years old. I have been touched in anger by professionals. This was not professional. This was a woman who had failed the academy twice, using her mother's microphone to teach a 61-year-old rancher a lesson in front of his neighbors. I let her walk me to the door. I did not resist. The recorder in my breast pocket continued to run. At the door, I turned. I said, at conversational volume, "Madam President, for the record, under what authority is the Pine Ridge HOA assessing fines against a non-member property owner whose land was deeded in 1979 and lies outside the HOA's recorded plat?" The room went quiet. Karen Caldwell leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "this board will use every legal mechanism available to make your property untenable until you accept our fair market offer for the frontage easement. Daily fines, weekly inspections, code violation reports to the county. We have the resources, and we have the patience. You do not." She said it on the record. She said it into a live microphone, in front of 60 residents, with my recorder running in my pocket. She said the quiet part out loud because she had spent 3 years saying the quiet part out loud to that room, and nobody had ever told her to stop. I said, "Thank you, Madam President." I walked out. In the parking lot, under the sodium light, Hector Vargas was leaning against the tailgate of my truck with his arms crossed. Amina Mamboya stood next to him in a wool coat, with her hands in her pockets. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Hector said, "Did you get it?" I patted the breast pocket of my jacket. He said, "All of it?" I said, "All of it." Amina said, "What now?" I said, "Now I order a mailbox." I drove home that night. I sat at the workbench, and I opened my laptop, and I placed 3 orders. 1 Salisbury Industries USPS-approved heavy-duty steel mailbox. 1 ASTM F2656 rated security bollard, rated to stop a 15,000-pound vehicle at 30 miles per hour. 4 Riolink 4K outdoor cameras with infrared and local storage, paid for overnight shipping on all of it. Total, $3,411. I emailed the receipts to myself. I printed the receipts and put them in the folder with the 7 certified letters and the expansion map. I put the recorder on the workbench next to the wallet I had not opened. The patrol got their 7th hit anyway, but this time, the bollard was already in the ground. The morning after the board meeting, 3 coffee mugs sat on my workbench. Hector Vargas took his black. Amina Mboya took hers with milk, no sugar. Mine had gone cold while I queued up the file on the laptop. The workshop smelled like sawdust and motor oil, and the particular smell of a kerosene heater that has been running since 5 in the morning. I had been up since 4. I had spent the night cutting 14 months of footage into a single 18-minute file. 6 prior mailbox hits. Date stamps in the lower right corner. Time stamps in the upper right. License plate of the Pine Ridge HOA Patrol Explorer in 3 different angles. And Brenda Caldwell's face, clear, lit, unobscured at the wheel of every single one. I turned the laptop so they could see the screen, and I hit play. Hector watched the first hit without expression. He watched the second one and rubbed his jaw. By the third, he had stopped rubbing his jaw and was leaning forward with his elbows on the workbench. By the fourth, Amina had put her hand flat on the surface of the wood and left it there. I let it run all the way through. When it ended, Hector exhaled through his nose and said, 22 months. I said, "What?" He said, Mine. 22 months. Not 14. I have it on my dash cam. 2 hits. Same explorer. Different driver the first time, her the second. He pulled his phone out of his shirt pocket and slid it across the workbench. 2 video files. He had labeled them, in his careful block-letter way, Mailbox 1 and Mailbox 2, with the dates and times typed underneath. Amina did not have video. Amina had paper. She set a manila folder on the workbench, the same color as the one Karen Caldwell had used for my $4,800 fine, and she opened it. Inside were 6 Sheriff's Department complaint forms, filled out by hand, signed and dated over 11 months. Each one described an incident: a destroyed mailbox, a damaged fence post, a Pine Ridge Patrol Explorer photographed at the property line, and each one had a routing stamp from the Pinewood County Sheriff's Office at the bottom. The stamps all said the same thing: private property dispute, HOA matter, not law enforcement jurisdiction, no further action. 6 times, Amina said very quietly. I stopped calling after the 6th one. I looked at the stamps for a long time. Then I said, "That answer is wrong." Hector looked at me. I said, "A mailbox approved by the United States Postal Service and installed at a federally recognized delivery address is federal property under 18 U.S.C. 1705. Destroying one is a federal felony. The sheriff does not get to decline jurisdiction on a federal crime because he thinks it's an HOA matter. The sheriff is just wrong." Amina said, "Then why hasn't anyone done anything, Frank?" I said, "Because no one filed it with the right office." I said, "Yet." I let that sit in the room for a moment, and then I pulled the legal pad over and I started building the timeline. Across the top of the page, I wrote 3 columns: Vargas, Holloway, Mboya. Down the side, I wrote the months January 2024 through November 2024, and I started filling in the boxes. Letter dates from each of us, hit dates from each of us, the dollar amounts on each fine letter, the dates of every sheriff complaint, and the dates of every brush-off. The pattern came up off the page like a photograph in developer fluid. Every letter we declined was followed by a hit within 72 hours. Every hit was followed by a refusal from the sheriff's office. And every refusal was followed by another letter from the HOA, slightly more aggressive, slightly more expensive, slightly more legal sounding. Hector said, looking at the chart, "It's a campaign." I said, "It's a campaign." Amina said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Since April." She said, "And you didn't say anything?" I said, "I needed them to do it enough times that no jury could call it an accident." She looked at me for a long second. Then she nodded once. She understood. People who run a ranch tend to understand patience in a way that people who live in cul-de-sacs do not. I poured a fresh round of coffee. We sat with the timeline between us. After a while, Hector said, "What do we do?" I said, "We keep documenting. We don't confront. We let the HOA hang itself on the next hit. I'm installing a new mailbox today. It's not a trap. It's a mailbox that meets federal spec and stands up. When they hit it, and they will hit it, the patrol vehicle is going to take the damage instead of the mailbox. That's not entrapment. That's physics." Amina said, "And then?" I said, "And then I file the complaint with the right office." I did not say which office. I did not say with whom. I said it the way I had said everything for the last 14 months. Flat, quiet, without flourish. Hector looked at me a little longer than usual after I said it. I think he was beginning to put something together. He did not ask. People who run cattle do not ask about things you have not yet said. The 3 of us walked outside. The bollard had arrived the night before. The Salisbury mailbox sat in its shipping crate on the gravel. The 4 Rio-Link cameras were lined up on the tailgate of my truck in their boxes, with the SD cards already loaded and the IP addresses already configured. I had ordered them with overnight shipping for a reason. I wanted them in the ground before the 7th letter triggered the 7th hit. We poured the concrete that morning. Hector mixed. Amina held the level. I set the bollard to depth 42 inches, 8 inches above frost line for our county, and we backfilled it, tamped it, and let it cure under a tarp. I installed the Salisbury mailbox on the bollard sleeve in the afternoon. Exact USPS height. Exact USPS offset. Reflective marking on the side facing oncoming traffic, the way the spec requires. I bolted on the small American flag because my father had bolted one on the original mailbox in 1979, and I had not asked his permission to stop. The cameras went in at sundown. two in the fence posts on either side of the mailbox, one in the live oak across the road, angled down to catch plate numbers, one at the gate to the workshop, pointed at the mailbox from 120 feet, in case the other three got knocked out. All four ran on local SD storage and pushed an encrypted copy to a cloud account I had registered under an LLC the HOA had no way to find. When the sun was down, the three of us stood on the gravel and looked at it. Hector said, "It looks like a regular mailbox." I said, "It is a regular mailbox." Amina said, "Will they hit it?" I said, "They've hit it 6 times. They will hit it a 7th. She said, "And you're sure?" I said, "I'm sure." I picked up my coffee from the fence post. It had gone cold again. I had stopped minding cold coffee in 1998, somewhere in the middle of a stakeout in a parking garage in San Antonio, and I had never gone back to caring. I drank it standing there, looking at the new mailbox under the porch light, with 2 ranchers I had known for 30 years, standing on either side of me. Hector said, "Finally, Frank, who exactly are we calling when they hit it?" I said, "I'll handle the call." He looked at me. I said, "I have the number." The 8th letter arrived 3 days after the new mailbox went in the ground. It was not certified this time. It was hand-delivered. I watched it happen on camera 3. Brenda Caldwell pulled up in a white Ford Explorer I had not seen before. A rental dealer plate. No light bar got out in civilian clothes. Walked up to the new mailbox, lifted the flag, dropped the envelope in, and snapped a photograph of the envelope inside the mailbox with her phone before she got back in the Explorer and drove off. I watched her do it from my workshop, on a 32-inch monitor, in real time. She did not know the cameras were live. I walked down to the gate 20 minutes later, opened the mailbox, and took out the envelope. It was thick. The seal on the back was the same dark green Pine Ridge embossing. I carried it back to the workshop without opening it and laid it flat on the workbench next to the 7 that had come before. Then I opened it. Notice of lien intent. That was the header, in bold, in a font 2 sizes too large, the way amateurs format documents they have copied off the internet. Underneath it, 3 pages of recitation, citation of HOA bylaws I had never signed, references to community jurisdictional authority that did not exist, and at the bottom, total cumulative fines and assessments. $11,400. Notice is hereby given that failure to remit within 30 days will result in the filing of a lien against the above-named property in Pinewood County, with foreclosure proceedings to be initiated within 90 days thereafter. I read it twice, slowly. I want you to understand what is wrong with that document, because the wrongness of it is the entire reason I let it land in my mailbox before I did anything about it. A homeowners association cannot file a lien against a property that is not in its association. That is not a technicality. That is the entire concept. An HOA is a private contract between the association and its members. If you are not a member, the association has no more legal authority over your land than the bowling league across town. The Pine Ridge HOA was not just wrong on this point. They were wrong on it in writing, on letterhead, with a date stamp, in a document delivered by their chief of patrol on camera. They had committed attempted lien fraud and recorded themselves doing it. I put the letter in the folder. I made a fresh cup of coffee. I waited. The tow truck came the next morning at 9:40. It was a flatbed, commercial, with the name of a towing company out of the next county painted on the door. The driver was a man in his late 30s in a high-visibility vest, with a clipboard and the look of someone who had been told this would be a routine call. Behind him, in a different rental, Explorer, this one, with a dealer loaner sticker still in the back window. Brenda Caldwell sat in the passenger seat with a copy of the lien notice in her hand, and a faint bandage still visible above her left eyebrow. I let them get out of the vehicles. I let them walk up to the mailbox. I let the tow driver loop a strap around the bollard's sleeve. I let him climb back into the cab. I let the winch take up slack. The strap creaked. The bollard did not move. The strap creaked louder. The truck's rear suspension squatted. The driver eased the winch up another notch. The strap pulled tight as a cable. The bollard did not move. The strap snapped. It came back at the cab with a sound like a rifle shot and laid a 6-inch welt across the hood of the tow truck. The driver flinched. He looked at the bollard. He looked at the strap. He looked at Brenda Caldwell through the windshield. Then he climbed out of the cab and walked around to her side and stood at her window with one hand on his hip. That was when I walked down the driveway. Same Carhartt jacket. Same coffee mug. The morning was cold enough that there was steam off the rim. I said, to the driver, "Son, what's your name?" He said, "Donnie." I said, "Donnie, what does the paperwork say is being removed today?" He looked at his clipboard. He said, "Obstruction. HOA removal order." The lady said it was a roadway hazard. I said, "Donnie, look at me for a second." He did. I said, "That mailbox is a federally protected mail receptacle installed at federal spec at a federally recognized delivery address. The lady in the passenger seat is wearing a $30 badge and works for a homeowners association that has no jurisdiction over this property. If you put your truck back on that bollard, you are going to be a federal witness to a federal crime by the end of the week." I'd unhook now. Donnie stood there for about 4 seconds. Then he walked back to the front of the truck, climbed up on the bumper, undid the strap from his end, dropped it in the gravel, and got back in the cab. He did not look at Brenda Caldwell. He drove away. That was the first time anyone in Pine Ridge's orbit had broken ranks. Brenda got out of the rental. She was on her phone first, then off it. She walked up to me with her shoulders forward and her chin out. She said, "You can't intimidate my contractor. That was tampering with a removal order. You're going to lose this ranch, old man. I'm going to make sure of it personally." I said, "Ma'am, I'd step back." She did not step back. She closed the last 2 feet and put both hands flat on my chest and shoved. I am not a large man anymore, but I have been shoved by professionals, and I know how to take a shove. I rocked back on my heels and caught my balance on the fence post behind me. The coffee in the mug sloshed, but did not spill. Brenda stood in front of me with her hands still half raised and a look on her face that suggested she had not quite decided, in the half second after her palms left my jacket, whether she had meant to do that. The cameras decided for her. Camera 1 had her face. Camera 2 had the shove from the side. Camera 3 had the audio of her threat to make sure of it personally. Camera 4, at 120 feet, had the wide-shot Brenda, me, the bollard, the mailbox, the small American flag, and Amina Mboya's silver Tacoma parked at her own gate across the road, with her phone visibly raised over the steering wheel. Amina had been recording the whole thing. Brenda saw the Tacoma. She saw the phone. Something behind her eyes recalculated. She walked back to the rental Explorer without speaking, got in, slammed the door hard enough that the dealer loaner sticker peeled an inch, and drove off. I stood on the gravel for a moment. Then I walked back up to the workshop. I sat down at the workbench. I opened the bottom drawer. I took out the leather wallet I had not opened in 9 years. I want you to understand what was in that wallet, because it has been sitting in that drawer for the entire length of this story, and the only people who knew about it were me and the US government. Inside the wallet was a gold 5-point shield with a banner above and a banner below. The top banner read, U.S. Postal Inspection Service. The bottom banner read, Inspector. The number stamped under the seal was a 5-digit credential number that the Postal Inspection Service had issued to me on a Tuesday in 1997 and had never asked me to return. I had retired in 2015 after 26 years. The service retains a recall authority for retired inspectors in good standing. On incidents the inspector personally reports, which means that on any federal mail-related crime I observed, in person, on my own property, the badge in my hand was not a souvenir. I set the badge on the workbench next to the yellow legal pad. I did not put it on. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I had not dialed in 9 years. It rang twice. A man's voice answered Houston Field Office, Postal Inspection Service, duty desk, and asked how he could help. I said, "This is retired Inspector Frank Holloway, credential 55812, San Antonio Division. I'm reporting an ongoing pattern of destruction of federally protected mail receptacles. 7 incidents. 14 months. Same actor. Full documentary evidence on file. I'd like a field inspector at my property tomorrow morning." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the man said, "Stand by, Inspector. I'm patching you to a supervisor." I waited. The coffee in the mug had gone cold. I knew exactly which office to call. I had worked out of it for 26 years. But I had waited. I wanted them to do one more stupid thing first. The patrol cars came at 1:15 the next afternoon. I had been expecting them since the moment I hung up with the Houston supervisor the night before. What I had not expected was the bullhorn. Karen Caldwell stood at the head of my driveway in a charcoal pantsuit and the same enamel pin from the board meeting, with a battery-powered bullhorn in her left hand and a stapled stack of papers in her right. Behind her, in 2 semicircles on the gravel shoulder of County Road 14, stood roughly 30 Pine Ridge residents, holding signs printed on white poster board. Maintain our property values. Remove the eyesore. Honor your HOA. Brenda Caldwell stood at her mother's right shoulder in full tactical polo, 2-inch nickel-plated badge, mirrored sunglasses, sidearm on her hip, directing the placement of signs with small, impatient gestures. And parked behind the crowd was a Pinewood County Sheriff's Office cruiser. Real plate, real light bar, real deputy. He was standing next to his cruiser in a dark green uniform, body cam clipped center chest, hand resting on the rim of his open driver door. He looked uncomfortable, the way a man looks when he has been called to a scene by people who have told him one story and he has arrived to find a different one. I walked down the driveway with a manila folder under my arm. I did not bring the coffee mug. Karen Caldwell lifted the bullhorn as I came into earshot. "Mr. Holloway," she said, the bullhorn distorting her vowels, "the residents of Pine Ridge Estates are gathered here today to demand the immediate removal of the dangerous structure you have installed in violation of HOA aesthetic and safety standards. We have a petition of 30 signatures. We have requested the assistance of the Pinewood County Sheriff's Office. We are giving you one final opportunity to comply voluntarily." The deputy did not move. He was watching me. I stopped at the edge of my own gravel, 10 feet from Karen Caldwell, and I addressed the deputy. "Sir," I said, "what's your name?" He said, "Deputy Lawson, Pinewood County." I said, "Deputy Lawson, I'd like to hand you 2 documents. May I approach?" He nodded once. I walked past Karen Caldwell. She lowered the bullhorn but did not step out of my way, and I handed Deputy Lawson the manila folder. He opened it on the hood of his cruiser. On top was a single-page photocopy of the 1979 easement deed. Instrument number 79-04412, recorded at the Pinewood County Courthouse on the 14th of March, 1979, with 2 county clerk stamps and the original surveyor's signature. The deed described, in fee simple, the road frontage along County Road 14 for 240 feet, granted to my grandfather and his heirs. Under that was a 1-page printout of 18 U.S.C. 1705. Plain text, no commentary. The federal statute on the willful or malicious destruction of letterboxes. Deputy Lawson read the deed. He read the statute. He took a long breath through his nose. He looked up at Karen Caldwell and said, "Ma'am, may I see the Pine Ridge HOA's documented jurisdiction over the property described in this deed?" Karen said, "We have a petition of 30 signatures." He said, "Ma'am, a petition is not a jurisdiction. Do you have a recorded document showing the HOA's authority over this specific parcel?" She said, "We have community standards." He said, "Ma'am, yes or no? Recorded document, property authority, over this parcel." She did not answer. Brenda Caldwell stepped forward and said, into the air rather than to the deputy, "This man's mailbox is a roadway hazard. It injured an officer. It damaged a patrol vehicle. He installed it as a deliberate trap." Deputy Lawson turned to her. "Ma'am," he said, "your injury report from that incident, please." She said, We don't file your patrol vehicle's accident report, filed with the state of Texas." She said, "It's being processed." "Under what authority," Deputy Lawson said, "do you operate a marked vehicle with emergency lights on a Texas county road?" She said, "Pine Ridge HOA authority." Something in Deputy Lawson's face changed. It was not anger. It was the look of a professional who has just understood that the situation in front of him is not the situation he was dispatched to. He took a small step away from Brenda Caldwell, half a step, really, just enough to put himself square with the cruiser instead of with her, and he keyed his shoulder mic and murmured something into it. Karen Caldwell saw the shift. She did what people in her position always do at the moment they feel the room tilt away from them. She doubled down. She lifted the bullhorn again. "Deputy Lawson," she said, the bullhorn cutting through her own composure, "I am formally requesting that you arrest this man for trespassing on Pine Ridge Estate's roadway frontage and for the deliberate creation of a hazardous structure causing injury to a duly authorized community safety officer." She was telling a deputy to arrest a man on his own deeded property at the request of a private homeowners association. The crowd behind her shifted, but did not move. Deputy Lawson looked at me for a long second. Then he looked at the manila folder on the hood of his cruiser. The deed was on top. He had not yet seen what was behind the deed. I had not yet shown him. I walked the 4 steps to the cruiser. I opened the folder. I lifted the deed and the statute aside. Underneath was the leather wallet, open. Inside the wallet was the gold 5-point shield, with the banner above and the banner below, and the credential number stamped under the seal. Deputy Lawson looked at the badge. He looked at me. He did not say anything yet. He was, very visibly, waiting for me to speak. I did not speak yet either. Behind us, Karen Caldwell raised the bullhorn one more time. "Deputy," she said, "I am ordering you. Arrest this trespasser on his own property." She did not see what was on the hood of the cruiser. She was 30 feet behind us, on the wrong side of the deputy's body, with the bullhorn against her cheek and her chin lifted at the angle she had perfected over 3 years of board meetings. She thought she was issuing a command. She was, in fact, dictating the audio that would later be transcribed as Exhibit C. Deputy Lawson looked down at the badge in the open wallet. He looked at me. He looked at Karen Caldwell. Then he looked back at me. She said, "Arrest him." The deputy looked at me. He looked at the badge in my hand, and then he looked at her. I lifted the badge out of the wallet. I held it so Deputy Lawson could read the embossed shield in full sunlight. U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Inspector. Credential 55812. I said, at conversational volume, Frank Holloway. Retired Inspector, 26 years, San Antonio Division. I am reporting a federal crime in progress. Deputy Lawson straightened. It was a small motion. A man, who had been leaning on the open door of his cruiser, put his weight back on his own 2 feet. But the crowd behind us saw it. Every sign holder in the front row saw it. Karen Caldwell, 30 feet back with the bullhorn still half raised, saw it last, because she was the only person in the gravel who was not watching the deputy at that moment. She lowered the bullhorn. She did not understand yet. She understood that something had changed. She did not yet understand what. Brenda Caldwell took one step backward. I do not think she knew she did it. People who have been wearing a costume for a long time, when they encounter the real thing, take one involuntary step backward before they remember to compose their face. Brenda's foot moved on its own. The gravel crunched under her boot. She glanced down at it, as if her own body had betrayed her. I turned to Deputy Lawson. I said, "Deputy, I'm formally invoking federal jurisdiction on destruction of United States Postal Service approved mail receptacles under Title 18, Section 1705. 7 confirmed incidents in 14 months. Full documentary evidence on file. The Houston field office has been notified. A field inspector is arriving at this property at 0900 tomorrow." Deputy Lawson said, "What do you need from me, Inspector?" He said the word inspector clearly. He said it loud enough that the front row of sign holders heard it. The shift in the gravel was small and physical. A woman in a navy windbreaker, holding a sign that read, "Maintain our property values," lowered her sign 6 inches. The man next to her, in a Pine Ridge polo, with the small enamel pin on the placket, did not lower his sign but stopped holding it up. Karen Caldwell finally registered the word. She said, into the bullhorn, "What did he just say?" Deputy Lawson did not look at her. He said to me, "Inspector, walk me through it." I said, "On camera, Deputy?" He tapped the body cam center chest. He said, "Always." I said, "Then for the record." I laid it out. I did not lecture. I named the counts. Count 1 through 7. 7 destructions of a USPS-approved mail receptacle on this property between January and November. Federal felony under 1705. 3 years per count. All 7 incidents on camera. Same driver. I nodded at Brenda. She had not moved her foot back. Count 8. Operating a marked vehicle with active emergency lights on a Texas county road without state authority. Texas Transportation Code. Class A misdemeanor. I nodded at the rental Explorer at the curb. Then at the original one she had been driving for 14 months. Count 9. Assault on a federal officer in the performance of duties. 3 days ago. Right there 10 feet from where you're standing. On 4 cameras. Audio and video. Brenda Caldwell's mouth opened a 1/4 inch. I did not look at her. Count 10. Attempted lien fraud and abuse of process. The Pine Ridge HOA, under President Karen Caldwell's signature, issued a notice of lien intent against a non-member parcel last week. The notice was hand-delivered by the Chief of Patrol while she was off the clock and on camera. I did not raise my voice. I named each count and stopped. The legal pad in the manila folder had the counts numbered and the supporting exhibits paginated. I had built it the way I had built 417 complaints before this one. I did not need to read from it. Deputy Lawson said, "Anything else, Inspector?" I said, One more thing. There is a pattern across 3 properties, mine, the Vargas Ranch to the south, the Emboya Ranch to the north. Same conduct, same actor, same documentary trail. The federal designation for a coordinated pattern of property crime tied to financial extortion is, as you know, racketeering. I will be turning that question over to the Postal Inspection Service field team tomorrow. I'm not naming it as a count today. I'm naming it as a question. Deputy Lawson nodded slowly. He keyed his shoulder mic. He said, "Dispatch, I'm going to need a second unit at County Road 14, mile marker 18. Non-emergency, detention assist." The dispatcher acknowledged. That was when Karen Caldwell came forward. She walked the 30 feet from the head of the crowd to the cruiser, with the bullhorn at her side. Her face was the color of putty. The enamel pin on her lapel caught the sun. She stopped 4 feet from Deputy Lawson, and she said, without the bullhorn, in a voice that had lost all of its podium, "There has been a misunderstanding." I said, quietly, "Madam President, for the record, would you like to repeat the statement you made at the November board meeting? The one where you said the board would use every legal mechanism available to make my property untenable. I have it on a 19-year-old recorder that has testified in 3 federal trials." "I'd be happy to play it now." She did not answer. Behind her, the woman in the navy windbreaker put her sign down on the gravel. She said, "Loud enough to carry, I want to say something." Deputy Lawson turned to her. She said, "I signed that petition because Karen Caldwell told me my landscaping fines would double if I didn't. I have the email." Another voice, from the second row. "She told me the same thing." A third, "She told all of us." A fourth, a man in a barn jacket who had not been holding a sign at all, who I later learned was a retired structural engineer named Don Pemberton, said, "I want a copy of that statute, Deputy, the one Inspector Holloway just cited. I'm going to be reading it carefully tonight." The petition was unraveling on its own gravel. Karen Caldwell turned around. She looked at her residence. She looked at her daughter. She lifted the phone in her left hand as if to call someone. She got as far as starting to dial. I said, "Madam President, if you're calling the HOA's attorney, you should know that the Postal Inspection Service has a federal court practice. You may want him to bring a colleague who has appeared in the Southern District of Texas." She lowered the phone. Brenda Caldwell, behind her, finally moved. She turned toward the rental explorer and began to walk. Deputy Lawson said, "Ma'am, stop, please." Brenda stopped. Deputy Lawson said, "Stay where you are. State's going to want to talk to you about your light bar, and the federal inspector's going to want to talk to you about everything else." Brenda stood on the gravel with her hands at her sides and her $30 badge on her chest and the bandage above her eyebrow now visible to 30 witnesses and 1 body cam and 4 of my own cameras, still recording from the fence posts and the live oak and the workshop gate. I closed the wallet around the gold badge. I looked at the mailbox. The small American flag had caught the afternoon light and was throwing a long, thin shadow across the gravel toward Karen Caldwell's feet. The coffee mug from yesterday morning was still on the fence post, cold. I had waited 14 months for this. It had taken 6 minutes. The field inspector arrived at 0900 the next morning. He was a man named Reyes, out of the Houston office, in a dark suit and a tie clip shaped like the same 5-point shield I had laid on the workbench the night before. He spent 4 hours at my property. He took the camera footage, the manila folder, the recorder, the timeline page, the 8 letters, and a sworn statement from each of us, me, Vargas, Emboya. He shook our hands at the gate. He drove off at 1:15. 6 weeks later, the indictments came down. Brenda Caldwell was charged with 7 counts of destruction of U.S. mail receptacles under 18 U.S.C. 1705 and 1 count of assault on a federal officer. 3 years per 1705 count, federal max. Karen Caldwell was charged separately by the Pinewood County District Attorney's Office in coordination with the U.S. Attorney's Office, with conspiracy to commit fraud, the lien notice, and abuse of process. The unauthorized emergency lights came in as a Texas misdemeanor, on top of everything else. The Pine Ridge HOA's insurance carrier dropped the association mid-case in a 1-page letter that cited willful conduct outside the scope of covered activities. That was the legal payoff. The financial payoff arrived in 2 pieces. The first was the easement fund. Pine Ridge had collected $214,000 from its 96 homeowners over 3 years in a line item called Secondary Access Reserve for the express purpose of buying or, as it turned out, taking the frontage in front of my ranch. The The fund was frozen by court order within 10 days of the indictment. The 96 homeowners filed a class action against the board for misuse of association dues. The settlement, when it came, dissolved the patrol unit entirely, stripped the board, and distributed the recovered funds back to the residents pro rata. The second piece was personal. The Pinewood County District Court issued a written order voiding all $11,400 of the fake fines, the lien notice, and the $1,200 citation from the morning of the 7th hit. The Pinewood County Sheriff's Office sent a letter actual paper, on actual letterhead apologizing to Amina Mboya for the 11 months of misrouted complaints and committing to a review of internal jurisdictional training. Amina framed the letter and hung it in her tack room. The social payoff came faster than I expected. The 96 homeowners of Pine Ridge Estates voted out the entire board in an emergency election 6 weeks after Reyes's visit. The new board, 3 women and 2 men, none of whom had ever held an HOA office before, ran on a single-sentence platform. We are a homeowners association. We are not a government. They won by margins that did not need to be counted twice. Karen Caldwell put her house on the market within 30 days. It sold in 11. The sign came down on a Wednesday in February. The 2 white Ford Explorers were auctioned off at the Pinewood County impound lot in March. Both had their light bars removed first, by court order. I drove past the auction on my way back from the feed store. The vehicles sat in a row with 3 repossessed pickups and a salvage title Camry, looking smaller than they had ever looked on County Road 14. Hector Vargas hosted a dinner at the property line in April. He set up 2 long folding tables on the gravel, where his easement met mine, with checkered tablecloths and a pair of brisket smokers running since 4 in the morning. Amina brought a flat of her tomatoes. I brought coffee, the kind people actually drink. 6 former Pine Ridge residents came, including Don Pemberton, the retired structural engineer who had asked Deputy Lawson for a copy of 1705, and the woman in the Navy windbreaker, whose name turned out to be Margaret, and who had been first to put her sign down on the gravel. We ate at sundown. Nobody made speeches. Margaret asked me, halfway through the meal, what I had done before I retired, and I told her, and she said, I should have guessed, and that was the end of it. The emotional payoff, the one that mattered, did not arrive in a courtroom or a settlement. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in May. I walked down to the gate at 5:40 in the morning with a mug of black coffee in my hand. The sky was the color it gets in central Texas, about 20 minutes before the sun clears the live oaks. The cattle were quiet. The mailbox stood at the end of the driveway, the small American flag still bolted to its side, the bollard still set 42 inches deep in concrete, the 4 cameras still in the fence posts, and the live oak and the workshop gate. I set the mug on the fence post. I stood there for a while. Nobody came down the road. No white Explorer, no bullhorn, no clipboard, no tow truck, no tactical polo. The county graded the road later that morning, the way the county had always graded the road, and the grader operator waved at me through the cab window, and I waved back. I walked back up to the workshop. I opened the bottom drawer of the workbench. I took out the leather wallet. I climbed the small stepladder, and I put the wallet back in the shadow box on the shelf where it had been on the morning of the 7th hit. The shadow box held the badge, my old credentials, a photograph of my academy class from 1989, and a folded letter of commendation from a Houston supervisor who had been 3 weeks from retirement when I started. I closed the workshop door. That afternoon, I rebuilt the section of fence the tow truck had clipped on its way out. I bolted the rail, set the post, tamped the dirt. Took about an hour. When I walked back up the driveway, the coffee mug was still on the fence post where I had left it at sunrise. The flag on the mailbox had caught the afternoon light the same way it had caught the morning light. The way it had caught the light on the morning the white Explorer hit it at 38 miles an hour. The way it had caught the light on the afternoon. The deputy said the word inspector in front of 30 witnesses. The mailbox was the same mailbox. The road was the same road. The flag was the same flag. I had not built a trap. I had built a mailbox that stood up. The federal government had agreed. I picked up the cold coffee from the fence post and carried it back to the workshop, the way I had carried it for 40 years, and I sat down at the workbench, and I started on the paperwork for the spring cattle vaccinations. They thought they were the cops. The mailbox knew better. The federal government agreed.